I was unfortunately elected chair of the Budget Advisory Committee at our last meeting on December. Thank you. Hey, listen, a couple years ago, Mr. Brockman will remember, I was 5 minutes late and I still got elected chair and I wasn't even in the room. So the fact is that, yes, sometimes. The case is that we started meetings at 6 o'clock, and I really do appreciate everyone coming out, so I will try to start promptly on time. I will try to keep us on task. Eric and I had some conversations afterwards. The case is that we really, truly, we only have 90 days to get a budget kind of done. At the same time, I will be doing the town of Standish's budget, so our time for both our staff and administration and you is valuable, so we try to keep on task. The case is that, unfortunately, I'm sure when I have a chance to recognize Mr. Gleason and Mr. Brockman, if you didn't know, the MSAD6 is a family. You are all family, things like that. Deb Silver, who was one of our longtime bus drivers, passed away. I would like a moment of silence. The case is that she was, by the way, if you didn't know her, she was not only one of the negotiation for her union for our district, but she was I think 27 years, Mr. Gleason, did I get that right? I think 27 years.
That sounds about right. She's been here, it feels like longer even, I think, but It's been a long time.
Yeah, so the case is that, and the fact is that, if you didn't know, Deb was one of our bus drivers, but 20 years ago, she came to me and asked me for a bunch of backpacks, and I looked at her funny, and I said, okay, why? And she goes, because I need them, and I said, great. Turned out, because the Portland Kiwanis Club used to get backpacks from Mike L. Bean, and we used to hand them out to people, and she heard that. So I gave her about 20 or 30 backpacks, and then the next week she came back and asked for more, and I said, Deb, what are you doing with these things? And it turned out it was because her and some of our employees were giving backpacks with food in them to kids, which was the start of the backpack program. So she and our food department and several of our staff. So in reality, she never asked for any recognition, but Deb was was an employee, and her passing is going to be recognized. So if I could have just a moment of silence. Thank you. To keep us on track, basically as way of the structure, if you have the packets outside, they also get sent to you on Tuesday. No, I know everyone like, oh God, I didn't get to read. Sorry, I actually told one or two of you that was 50 pages. It's only 46. So if you haven't done your homework, don't worry about it. This isn't something where we're going to I'm going to quiz you on what's on page 8. But the case is that, so yes, they're here as well. And if you didn't get one of Tina's not here tonight, if you didn't pick up one of the nice black things that she gave to me that I left at home, so you can officially get me in trouble, I left her a nice black thing she has to all our documentation. They're over there on the table behind you. For Eric Kuntz, who's the vice chair, and I, if everyone could turn their name tags facing us, so when Eric or I are trying to recognize you, we can try to recognize you by name. Thank you. The public comments number 2, which is on page 5, is highlighted in rules. Just one word from the chair. If you want to be recognized for public comment, there's a set of rules, 3 minutes. Please, I am basically saying this in the most kind of, let's say jovial way, but at the same time very serious. We have 90 minutes. So our time is very precious. If you want to get up and spend 3 minutes talking to us about a recipe or the fact of what you did on your holiday, that's great. But my concern is our time should be focused on budget issues, not other things. And that if we're going to relate or bring things up, that we try to focus not on other issues that should be addressed to other things. Like if you want to talk, I'm only picking on Adam because he was here early. But if you want to talk about the glazing on the windows, I'm going to send you to Finance and Facilities and have you talk to them about things like that. If it addresses a budget issue, great, but at the same time, we need to stay on topic, and the 46 pages should be enough to tell you how much work we have to do. Couple housekeeping things. If you have devices and you don't know, the Bonnie Eagle Guest Network is the network you have to register for if you want to keep up with things. Please mute your devices so they don't go off. I'm not going to, fine or have fun with people, but just understand that we try to respect other time. For Deb and I, we laugh, but the fact is that because we remember the building, Miss Black and I, the bathrooms are in this hallway down here because somebody asked me where they were. Down this little hallway here is our bathrooms. So if you need them, feel free to get up and use them. If at this time, if there's any public comment from the audience, please go to the podium over there. There's no microphone, but it's easier for people to be recognized. The case is that we also have Nancy Lou Stiles has asked for public comment as well from the thing. So please state your name and town, and you have 3 minutes.
Stop in and say thank you all for volunteering your time. This is very important work, and I just appreciate you all being here. Secondly, I wanted to say how important it is and how serious this role is. And it's important that you study your packets, that you digest it as well you can, and you come prepared with questions. In our board meetings, our packets are generally, 40 to 75 pages at times. And we generally get our board packets about 4 days in advance. And it's, in my opinion, it's still not quite enough time, but I make it work over the weekend. I know we all have busy schedules, so I just want to encourage you all to come prepared as best you can. I know these packet, Todd, you said that does it normally come out on Tuesdays? Because I really want to ask if you can, is there any way you can get it to the committee before 2 days in advance? Because I have had no opportunity, I know I'm not a voting member, but no opportunity to look through it yet. And if I were to do that in a board meeting, there would be no reason for me to be there, in my opinion. It's just hard to vote on things when you're not quite prepared. Thirdly, I did vote no on the budget last year. I was the only one that did. And I was falsely accused of not being for students and staff, which is false, a ludicrous thing to say. I voted no because I felt it could have been a more balanced budget. And when we're looking at senior citizens in our school district who are on very fixed incomes having $200 to $300 raises in their taxes, we have to consider that. And this committee recommended the highest budget to the board, and that's what passed. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. Also, I'm almost done. I looked at a statistic from the Department of Education from the past 20 years, 2000 to 2019. There has been a steady decline in student enrollment. We're seeing it in our district too. And the statistics show that the students were at 8%, teachers were at 8%, and administrators were at 78%. So as the students are declining, they're seeing an increase in administrative roles, and that's not balanced. I'm not sure what the statistics are here in this district, but I think that needs to be looked at. I know there are a couple administrative roles that seem to be overlapping. Not trying to get rid of anyone's jobs, but we need a balanced budget like we do in our personal budgets and any business budget. We can't just keep things going the way they are if there's no money to do it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Nancy Lou, you had, as I said, sorry, from last time, if you don't remember, when you use your microphones, if you don't have one in front of you, try to just hit the button to make sure the green light or share, Just 1 second, Ben.
Yeah, I'm glad we're here tonight. It's pretty icy out there. I wanted to talk, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to talk a little bit about using your phones. A lot of people I see around the room are texting, I guess you call it. I'm not really sure what it's called. But to me, it's cheating the committee out of your attention and your full attention. It's like half of the attention, half the other attention. So I think that it would be, rather than have divided attention, it would be better if everybody paid attention. I think that it's, wait a minute, I better see what I wrote down. I'll be in trouble. If our meeting is important enough to come to, then please give it your full attention. I think it's rude when I get up to talk or when I'm speaking for everybody to say, well, I'm going to be talking to another friend now. I don't want to listen to what she has to say. I think it's very rude, and I think that it's unprofessional. we have an hour and a half of time, and if you want to spend that hour and a half texting to your friends, please stay home and do that. But when you come here, this meeting is important. I think it's important, and I'd like to see. I think it's rude. It's like a slap in the face to me when you're ignoring me. It's a slap in the face to the committee, and it is definitely a slap in the face to our children, to our students. I think that they deserve an hour and a half of our time. So for anybody that wants to do texting, either step out of the room or don't do it here, and I would appreciate that. And thank you very much for your time, and if you decided to give it to me, thank you for your attention.
Are there any other public comments? If so, just make sure to state your name, because these are being taped if we didn't talk about it last time, so just in case. No, if you want, Ben, you can use the microphone right in front of you. If you got a microphone close to you, fine. You don't have to go to the podium, yeah.
So I just looked at the budget for this fiscal year, the current budget, and I'm just looking at this, and we see 7.8% of our budget going towards administrative cost. And if you look at superintendents, admins alone, superintendents, we're spending $149,000 on admins for superintendents. And then you combine that with superintendent assistant admins, we're spending $130,000. I'm just going to say, I don't know any business that's run this way, and I don't understand. I want to know the job descriptions, and I want to know the day-to-day operational aspects. Any logistical manager or facilities manager or anybody in facilities maintenance or any of that operational management would be looking and saying 7.8% of my budget is going to administration with a declining student population. That money should be in our teachers' salaries. It should be going to recruiting the best and brightest teachers to our district. And on top of that, we need to do something about facilities maintenance, and that's something I'll be continually talking about, because our students should come first, and the money should be in the classroom, not in some bureaucrat's hands.
Are there any other public comments? The only thing, by the way, Tina's not here tonight, Tina Plummer, who works in the business office, but Eric and I's email and phone numbers will be in the packet going out probably next week, and I will try to see if we can get them out as soon as possible. If you ever have a public comment, like I said last time, there was one person who reached out to me, asked about the fact of the why we don't say the Pledge of Allegiance. I said to that person, I said, I will bring it up at the next meeting. So if you ever have a comment and you didn't want to say it, feel free to talk to Eric or I. That's the same thing of talking to either one. Talking to one's like talking to the other one. So the case is that just like it was with Kate and me for the last 2 years. So I will ask, in the sense if there's an issue or concern, but the case is that always feel free to reach out. So the only other comment that came into me offline was the fact of why we don't say the Pledge of Allegiance. I didn't have an answer and said I would address it at the meeting, as that's the chair's job. So, Mr. Gleason, Mr. Brockman, for the next time the agenda, is there any issue or concern with adding the Pledge of Allegiance, which is done at the Board of Directors meetings? I don't have an issue or concern with it if there's any comment or concern. That's, as I said, the only question I have to you as public comments coming to an end.
I have no objection. It's typically something we haven't done at subcommittee meetings, so like a finance and facilities meeting or whatever like that, we wouldn't typically have done it, but if that's the pleasure of the group, it doesn't take very long to do that, so no problem to do it. It's just not a regular practice at committee meetings.
Because Tina's not here, what I do is when you make a motion, I just try to repeat your name. And by the way, my official proclivity, by the way, is Mr. Gleason and Mr. Brockman knows. I usually refer to them by their surnames and things like that. That's just my nature. So I try to be as, let's say, my wife instructs me to be more, let's say, less robotic. But when you make a motion, I will try to make sure that we get your name into the records. That's because it's repeated and recorded. So, Eric, you want to?
Motion to add the Pledge of Allegiance to the agenda.
Is it second, Mr. Burns? So we have a motion by Eric Kuntz, second by Mr. Peter Burns to add the Pledge of Allegiance into our agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, just raise your hand. Thank you. Chair votes to the motion carries, so we'll move forward to that. Number 3, ground rules and norms, which is on page 4 of your packets. The case is that it's all laid out, and also number 4, rules for public comments and meetings are at number 5. On page number 6 of your packet, approve the minutes of the previous meeting. These are not board meeting minutes. They're the more the 10,000-foot view, and I applaud the business office for doing a good job, but they're not supposed to be like minutia. This isn't a, we just try to make sure we get the head points. If there's anything missing at this time, I would ask you to say it so that we can put it into the minutes, like if we, if someone made a motion and we got it wrong or something like that. But I didn't, when I glanced at them yesterday, I didn't see anything that jumped out at me like, oops, this is a mistake. Any adjustments or changes to the minutes, which start on, as I said, page, basically, I think they started on page 6. Yeah. Seeing none, the chair would entertain a motion to accept the minutes as submitted. Mary Hoffman has made the motion, and Erica Kreutz has seconded. Seeing no conversation or discussion, all those in favor, just raise your hand. Thank you. The motion carries. All right, now, Mr. Brockman, Mr. Gleason, I'm going to turn this over to you. Number 8, unfinished business, page 8, which is the unfinished business from the previous meeting. Mr. Brockman and Mr. Gleason, the floor is yours.
We have a list of some of the questions that we obtained from the first meeting, and I'm pretty sure that those aren't the only questions that you have. So I want to continue to try to flesh out what items of interest that you have that we can eventually give you more specific detail on. So I'm opening it up to the floor. If you have questions, they'll be in the next packet. And if you don't feel that you can ask in public, I think sending your list of questions to Tina, to Todd, or to Eric, you please do that. But we want to be able to gather that information so we can address those areas with truthful information.
Mr. Burns.
In last year and the year before, there was a lot of concern and discussion concerning the water in our license and the procurement of land and whether we were or were not going to be able to, for the discharge, to take care of it. I certainly would like to know where we stand with the licenses, where we stand with the money that we're spending on that, and are we legal yet, and an update on that situation, if you would.
We do have a new system that's approved by the state. We received a grant to help pay for part of that. The rest was paid for out of the capital reserve account. The system is functioning. We are no longer dumping into the river. We are legal. And hopefully we'll stay legal for a long time. I'm looking to Adam. He might want to fill in the blanks on that.
I don't know that I have any more information to add than that. I mean, you get it right on the head. That's exactly where we stand. System operates perfectly fine. It's operated every day and washed every day. He's right. It does not discharge in the river. It is permitted from the DEP as such. It is taken off the DEP's list as a dumping site.
Yes, the chair is extremely happy with that, Adam. I understand that when I was chair of the school board, I actually wanted a tour of the Department of Transportation, which we did, the food department, which we did, but when I wanted to take the board to Deb's going to laugh at this moment, when I wanted to take them to our septic treatment plant, that was the only one the board didn't want to do, for some strange reason. Yes. Sorry, I'm showing my geeky, Kate will be laughing at me probably, yeah. So the case is yes. Any other comments or concerns? But by the way, if you have one, don't worry. We'll bring this up constantly. Yeah, Mr. Basir. Yeah.
In general, just open, Bill, point of information, just open concerns in general.
That you haven't addressed already.
Related to budgets, yes, absolutely.
So I would just say, number one concern is, like I spoke about last meeting, the maintenance cost of all these buildings, 15%, and Steep Falls specifically. Looking at the line items for maintenance cost for the facility in Steep Falls, we need to do a deep dive, and would love to sit down and talk about the salaries that are there and the maintenance cost, and talk about consolidation.
We are working on that. We are in the process of beginning to do a real facility. We did a facilities audit, so we have additional information that we have for all the buildings that tell us how much deferred maintenance we have, how much it's going to cost us potentially to bring everything up to code and to make everything the best we can for students. We will be looking at doing a real analysis of where we will need to go in the next 10 years so that we know what we are facing, and if we have opportunities to consolidate buildings, that will be part of the process. And we will be starting that in another month, and we will be working on that so that if in fact it looks like we have a lot of issues that we have to deal with, not just from a facility audit or condition standpoint, but also for us to be able to provide the best quality education for the kids and how we should be utilizing our facilities. And I'm absolutely sure that Steep Falls will be a topic of intense discussion on. So we will be working on that, and we're hoping to be able to have a committee that will be looking at those things along with our consultant to give us an idea of where we need to go in the future. So we do recognize that what you're saying is something that we need to look at.
Kate McDonald?
Thanks, Todd. Bill, can you talk about how that ties into the consolidation that we were talking about in 2019, 2020, if it does, or where you've come from there?
Actually, what we do to consolidate is still an open question. So we're going to look at that whole issue of what do we do with that building and other buildings, and we're going to combine that part of the study with the actual assessment of the buildings themselves. And it may be that as we get into this process and we start looking at things and we find that a building is in worse shape than what we actually perceived, that consolidation may take different forms. And so it's tied, but the result or the outcome is not determined yet. We will be working to do that.
Ms. Bodecker?
Yes, I am going to ask you, so you're saying that you're going to do an assessment, basically, or a study
Yes.
Is it you that's doing the study? Who
No.
would be doing the study? You're hiring that company?
Yeah, I don't have time to do that.
Don't even think about it.
I hope that,
I was speaking in
It's-
figures only, like once you receive all of these figures, and what company you're assessing? the-
Harriman,
Okay, so it is that company.
yes.
And, okay, that's what I was, yes.
And, you know, they're one of the largest firms in the state of Maine. They were the one that designed our Buxton Center Elementary School a few years ago. They have the wherewithal to be able to do a good job on a long-term plan. So we have interviewed them. We went out to bid and we have decided through the Finance and Facility Committee that we are going to award them the contract to do this. So we will be beginning that process shortly.
And when does that study look like they might be finished? I'm just trying to get this all on the record. I'm sorry that you thought that was
Well-
very funny.
No, about 9 months.
Great, thank you very much. I think this is important information, so.
Mr. Brockman, wasn't Harriman involved, to Mrs. McDonald's point, like, wasn't in 2019, 2020, they were, weren't they also with the expansion of the high school science labs? There was a couple things Harriman's been involved.
They were not involved in that, but a few years before Buxton Center, they were involved in a study at the high school and at Hollis when there looked like there might be a chance to
Okay.
obtain some state funding for that.
Yeah.
And they did it.
I just remember there were plans for about the theater expansion or the
Exactly.
gym expansion. Harriman's name was on those plans. I just couldn't remember if
Yeah.
Mrs. McDonald was remembering something I wasn't, so thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to add too that it's important that we look at the sort of the long game, the big picture, because I've come into this process definitely looking at efficiencies and how can we be more efficient, but we also have to think about not impeding opportunities. And I think one of the things this group might benefit from is what the process is of closing a school, because it isn't as simple as just moving the kids out of it. There's a legal sort of process you have to follow that involves a formal vote and, making sure that people know that. It's not necessarily a quick process. So even though we decide, when we get to the point that we think it's a good idea and it's the right thing, there's still a process we have to follow, part one. And then the other thing is construction projects. If we get to the point where we do come around to a construction project, what steps need to go into that, and we need to make sure that we're not in the short term making a decision that costs us in the long run. Because often for construction projects to be considered and funded in part by the state, they want to see us solving many problems. And if we start fixing some of these problems piecemeal, it could get in the way, excuse me, of our application in the long run. So I think it would be helpful for this group to understand those things, and maybe there's opportunities for some brief presentations on those topics.
Paul, Mr. Leach?
Maybe I missed it, but I'm looking at the elements 11. It says monitor, measure, evaluate program performance. I don't see historical on program performance. I just see financials, which is, we're here budgeted, but the whole point, and everyone keeps saying we want to have the best education for our kids. I have yet to see data on the presentation showing test scores, increased reading performance, math skills. That's one of the big concerns that I'm worried about, because we can say words like better education, but it's not measurable, and we need to be able to see it in order to measure it. So that's just my concern.
We do have that question listed already, and I think we will be working on bringing a presentation to this committee to talk about some of those things that have been initiated to improve test scores, and hopeful that we'll be able to do that with Lori making a presentation to you.
Just so you know.
Hey, you're allowed to clap. This is serious, but at the same time, we're, okay? Any other?
Bring some friends, but
but yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Hey, Lori, it took me, my first vote as a school board member was to tear down a building. 5 years later, we voted on that one, and that was when it finally got done. It took me, so, trust me, it takes time sometimes. So, the fact is that, any other questions or concerns? Ms. Higgins?
Just a comment. I know that the enrollments have been dropping consistently, and I took a little drive around a few days ago, and I don't know what's happening in Buxton and Hollis or Leamington, but Standish is building houses faster than you can shake a stick at them. In specific, the Nature's Way development up in Steep Falls, I drove through there and was just amazed at how many in-progress homes there are, which is in the purview of the Steep Falls Elementary School. And the development from the bottom of Oak Hill over to 25 has tripled in the last 3 or 4 months. So I understand we have to go by our current enrollments, but with the housing boom that appears to be happening, we may need to be a little more flexible about the budget and other things. Just my 2 cents worth.
Oh, yeah, and to Mrs. Higgins' point, by the way, on page 40 of your packets, that's the enrollment figures, by the way. All right? So page 40, which is a little bit farther down the road, is, thank you, Mr. Brockman, for having the business office include the enrollment figures for the last few subsets. Any other questions? Ms. Brisser?
I just want to respond to that. Also, if you want to look at the town of Standish and how many houses they're building and blah, 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 I think that you can go to the town, have them pull records of building permits, and look at that over a historical trend. And if you look at data and you look at these numbers, it's page 40, I think you said, right, Todd?
Yeah, in the packets, the BAC
Page
packets,
40.
yeah.
This is 16 years of data records. If you go to the town of Standish and pull the building permits, I would love to see what the percentage of increase is for building permits for new properties in Standish are. Are they really significantly higher to justify a significant increase in the budget? We need to ask ourselves that. And I'm willing to contact the town to pull that info.
Don't worry, Mr. Becerra, as I said on the Standish Town Municipal Budget Committee, I do provide, by the way, for housekeeping thing, I do send our PDFs to the town manager, the town clerk, and the town treasurer for Standish. If your town officials aren't getting these packets, please make sure they get Mrs. Plummer, T. Plummer, bonnieeagle.org, and ask for them. I do it anyway because I'm a nudge. But the fact is that, yes, Mr. Brashear, I've got your note here. I just talked to the town manager in Standish, and when I sent her the packet, I was asking when our budget committee meeting starts. I will ask them for some of the information to pass on to Mr. Brockman, because that's easily gained. And as I am a member of the budget committee, the town manager is kind of, unfortunately, Mrs. Higgins has to do it. So I will ask for you. All right? Any other questions or concerns? Don't you hate having me around? All right, next, Mr. Brockman. This is my favorite subsection, by the way, so if I smile a lot during this one, it's because this is the thing I love that we do, so.
Well, the whole budget process, and especially this year where we have quite a few new members on this committee, the ongoing membership has looked at this over time, and I'm not going to go through line by line on this, but I want you to spend some time reviewing it. There's no, at this point, you're not making any votes. You have the rest of this whole process to read this and to try to digest why we do what we do, and that there is, some we, we try to establish a process that makes sense moving forward, that does, put a method into the madness, and hopefully, as you go through this, you'll see that we go through a process here before it even gets to the Budget Advisory Committee. A lot of work goes into this whole process. So there's a lot of information for you to read, come up with any questions that you have, make sure that we know about them and that we can address them in a presentation. One of the areas that I want you to really focus on is page 12, is the budget approval process established by the legislature in the state of Maine, and why we do what we do in actually voting our budget. The reason that we use what we do for information is prescribed by state statute, and we are required to develop a budget warrant that is voted on at the district budget meeting, which is really the first step in the public vote process. We have to follow the cost center format prescribed by law, which you can see on page 12. Those are the areas of the budget that we have to vote separately, and of the revenue sources. That district budget meeting that we do in May is really the first step. What is actually voted and approved at that meeting by each individual article and several others that are also prescribed by state law. That bottom line number is what we vote on in the budget validation referendum, which occurs in June. And that is a secret ballot that's voted on at each of the voting places in all 5 towns. So that is the second step. And it just goes on and explains what happens if the budget is voted down, and what we have to do according to state law to become solvent and legal.
Mr. Brockman, didn't last year, didn't we approve wasn't it the 3-year, sorry, we have to do that every 3
Yes.
years, page 14?
Yep, every 3 years we
Yeah,
have to
wasn't it-
vote.
was-
And
sorry,
it
was-
was last year.
Okay, so last year, so we're doing this way for the next, for
2
6 years. Yeah, okay.
And
Thank you,
if-
Mr. Brockman.
And if we vote not to continue the process, what that eliminates is the budget validation referendum. The only thing that we would then have is the district budget meeting in May, and that would be the final approval of the budget. So I think we voted on that, since that's been a law, maybe 4 times. And every time the voters have chosen to continue the process the way it is. And if you look across the state, probably at least 98% of all the school systems in the state have voted to continue that process. Very seldom would voters want to give up an opportunity to vote. And I don't blame them, I wouldn't want it either. So this packet goes on with some information about each of the steps according to the Government Finance Officers Association on what a good budget would be and how you can develop a budget that, makes sense for stakeholders and for the district. Communication is very important. That's why we have this group. Not every school has this, but we do a number of meetings every year. And the more people that we can get involved and the more people that each of you can talk to about the budget helps us get the word out, good or bad. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's what the voters ultimately want to approve. And we want to just provide the best quality education, the best quality of facilities for the people in this district, so that, you know, when we do have to have a tax increase, it's justified. We have, according to Government Finance Officers Association, 4 principles of the budget process.
15, we're on page 15.
Oh, geez.
16.
You want to?
Sorry.
Sorry.
That's
Before
okay.
we jump
Lori's
into the,
right.
one sec,
And-
before we jump into the principles, did you have a question that covered? Okay. Thank you. Go on, thank you. Anyone else?
So you can read what the principles are. The decision-making process is kind of interesting when you look at that. You know, there are 5 steps in making decisions. And they go from strategic, which is really a high level. You're looking at the whole district, not necessarily slicing it into one program or one person, or, but that's the way we have to start the budget process. And that's where this group really needs to focus on. It's the big picture. Tactical, those decisions of how to deliver services have to be developed by the administrators or the people that work in the budget at a higher level. The tactical operational, what happens with operational decisions, it's going to be how do we make that happen at the building level or the program level. And then really it folds back into strategic. Everything needs to be according to our goals of the district, and we need to be able to look at things in broader picture. Sometimes when you get down into the weeds, you're not really helping improve education because you hire people to do that. You hire administrators and you hire teachers and support staff to do the work.
Mr. Brockman and Mr. Gleason, Eric asked a question which was relevant. The strategic plan periodically, as I asked Erica, comes to the board members, but it is still on, it's on the MSAD6 Bonnie Eagle website, if I remember correctly, the strategic plan, Mr. Gleason?
Yes.
And Lori, I think, I think,
And the
sorry.
strategic plan will be in the next packet.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is available under district. Let me see if I can go back here. It's under district, MSAD6 strategic plan information, and then there's a link for the strategic plan, so it's right on the bonnieeagle.org website.
It's in my next packet. So
Thank you, Mr. Brockman.
we will go over that. And then, you know, you have the elements, but then you have to have, you know, principles that that you're trying to follow, which is what we looked at. And then there are 12 elements, and you can read those. And on page 18, you have a list of, it's a design and delivery flow chart that just shows you what the process that we go through to get to the point of being able to monitor and make sure that the budget is working for the whole year. A budget is not a document that is unchanging. It has to change according to what is going on and what the changes and needs are. So the Finance and Facility Committee is charged with the responsibility of monitoring the budget. And they also look at, as we go through the year at the committee level with them, they also look at changes that are required depending on, current existing conditions that need to be taken care of, either hiring another teacher if all of a sudden you have, 42 kids in a, kindergarten classroom, and I think that is the number, right? I'm only kidding. But we look at that stuff all the time as we go through the facility committee meetings.
I see some maybe questions from people up to this point, now that we've gone through the elements and principles. Is there anything that anyone would like to clarify?
After all of that, it occurred to me that if we could we were talking about declining enrollment before, and it occurred to me that we can't do anything about it unless we get to the bottom of it. And is it something that is in our control at all? We don't know that, because has anybody done a survey with parents to find out what the problems are? Why they would be declining. The last superintendent at a budget meeting tried to tell me that it was soccer, that kids in the soccer program, they went to a different school because of the soccer program. I mean, come on. We need to get real and find out why enrollment is declining, and find out if we are truly getting more people in our towns, then what's happening? Why are these kids going to other schools? Obviously, they must be. So there has to be some way that we can do a survey. I know for a fact that you were speaking about Merriman. They were going to do an some of the budget depends on how many students we have. They told us that. But why are we waiting to find out if there's anything that we can do about it until it's too late? Why can't we be preemptive and try to find out what the problem is and try to counter it so that we can get more children in the schools and keep parents and keep children, parents mostly, because parents are the deciding factor.
Kate, and then since we'll go to Mr. Gleason.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Bill, a couple of years ago, you had quite a lot of data on enrollment that was declining, not due to people pulling their kids, but due to fewer kids. That might be a good thing to bring back.
What the whole process with Harriman will be is part of that, looking at those kind of factors. The information that we gathered 2 years ago probably is not as accurate right now as because a lot has changed in a couple years, and a lot will be changing in the future. One of the things is that what has happened is that property has become so expensive in the last year and a half that people can't afford to live in Portland. So now they're beginning to look at, the surrounding areas like Leamington and even Standish. and which is kind of surprising, but it's happening. We don't know how many kids that will actually produce for us in the future. And looking at information from a couple years ago, and the reason that I really haven't included that study in the information that I'm giving you right now is that I don't want you to look at that and think that, oh, well, you know, our enrollments are dropping for the next 10 years, because I don't think they are. We need to have that information updated. And we've hired somebody to give us that information. We can speculate on why it is what it is. It's not because of soccer. We're talking about 5 kids, and we're talking about losing 637 students over the period of time that I've historically listed. So there is a declining enrollment in students in the state of Maine. I mean, it's not just us. We're losing kids everywhere. We can't make the kids if they're not there. We put an ad in the paper and say, come to us.
All right, we're going to go to Mr. Gleason and then Ben. I'm going to let that one lay there because your wife, I love your wife, but there's a point where like, okay, Mr. Gleason.
I don't want to belabor this too much. Like, I absolutely, Charity, understand your point. I think there's not a single reason, but we do need to do a better job understanding what those reasons are. And there is a point at which the kids aren't there, right? I don't know if they're necessarily going anywhere else or they just aren't as many kids because of declining birth rates or people moving into these housing developments that don't have kids with them, and so absolutely studying that, and I think that's one of the things Harriman will help us with is studying that, getting better. Well, I know, but one thing that I've been very intrigued about since last year, and I haven't gotten my head around how to accomplish it, is no, we can't make people enroll here, but how do we promote what we do offer to make it more, have our reputation be out there and be more prominent on internet searches and other things. And there are companies that will help you with that. It's just, what's the cost? And, as we're talking about budgeting, how do we improve our web presence and our reputation and get ourselves out there, but not, break the bank doing it? Because there are companies, and I actually have a meeting coming up with a company that does that. That's what they do. They put your school information at the top of web searches when people are looking for houses on real estate sites and things like that. So how do we attract our more customers, if you will, right? So it's a great concept.
There may be some admin people that might have those skills actually in the schools, so I would assess that too, rather than, you don't think so? I mean, I don't know. But
no, I think they might have the skills. It's the reach. It's the resources and some of these companies, this is all they do, right? So they have their algorithms and the way that they have things programmed to get right into the top of Google searches and things.
Yes, it's called search engine optimization. And
there you go, Mr. Delaney.
Sorry, no.
That's exactly what I was saying, right?
That's
it's the same thing.
No, yeah, he does. Clay, you said search engine optimization. You just didn't say it the geeky tech nerd way, which I would, okay? Mr. Brisser, you had your hand up.
So I just want to speak to Charity's point. I'll be reaching out to the Maine Department of Education to talk to them about overall enrollment in the state of Maine. Obviously, Maine is a state with a birth rate that we need to evaluate on the state level. A lot of people are not having kids. It's increasingly becoming harder for many throughout the country and the state that have kids. Average age of Hollis is about 50.4 roughly according to census data. So that means a lot of those people, their kids are aging out, they're graduating. That's a part of the decline. Maine Department of Education, also social emotional learning, we need to talk about in the future. Why are people going to homeschool options? Why are people going to private school institutions? Because they are sick of the curricula that is going on in the school system. And I'll tell you that I've talked to many people in this district at their house, at their door. They said, I pulled my kids and it hurt me financially, but it's because of what's being taught in our schools. I'll always be blunt about that. And thankfully I'll have the financial means where if it continues, I don't have to put up with it.
I just want to point out that we have a lot of our agenda to get through, and we're at 101. I know we've got a lot of passion points here, but we haven't even heard the basics, so I'd love to see us
Yeah, I'd like to
get on the
to
agenda.
page number 31 in the overview if we can. Yeah, Paul, every question's real. I just,
Sorry.
Eric and I are gonna beat you guys and keep you on time, trust me. We'll
Sorry,
keep you there.
You know, the kids' questions are like, "Daddy, what's this?" Anyway, so my understanding with this whole budget is we start from element 1 and work from 12 every single year. That's my understanding is that we do that. Then, but that seems like a long process. I'm assuming it's more than just a singular year. Like this is like, hey, let's do a 10-year program, and then, instead of redoing next year, just go 1. You kind of skip back to where 5 is. So like, I just want to understand, because there's this assessing community needs and priorities. You do that on a yearly basis. Who does that? I'm curious about that real quick. If a little more detail on that aspect.
You want me to answer that one, Mr. Brockman, or you want to handle that one?
We go through the whole process. It's not, the thing is, there's no possible way for us to do a zero-based budgeting, which means looking at every line item and reevaluating that line item every year. But like I said earlier, we need to do at least the global, 50,000-foot review of all the elements so that we can determine changes that might have happened. I can see this year that right here, there's been a significant change in what the Budget Advisory Committee is sort of talking about right now compared to previous years. So that, we have to look at that as being some kind of a systemic change in the communities, possibly. So you have to evaluate all of those elements and principles and elements in order to get to the point where you're making valid, maybe one year people are happy with things and the next year they're not. You have to take that into consideration because we really want to provide a budget that the people want and that they are willing to support at the polls. We don't want to go through the process of presenting a budget that people just wouldn't support. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for us to do that, because if it's not what the people want, then why would we, waste our time trying to do something that isn't what's important? I think you have to look at the information at a higher level.
Is that higher level the what's on the website? They were talking about the strategic plan. Is that the higher level that we're going by?
Well, that is part of the goals of the district, so.
Yeah, that's one. That was my whole point. Was where's our starting point every year? Is
Paul,
that the starting point?
No, what happens, Paul, to be honest, we have 90 days to put forth the budget. The current budget that we are operating on as we work every year through this, the Budget Advisory Committee kind of refines and hones it. So I'll give you an example. Our superintendent and assistant superintendent will present to the BAC a recommended budget based on what we currently have. Usually then what happens, the BAC will look at needs, wants, concerns. And there is a running joke, and Adam remembers this last year. We were looking at facility needs, and Mr. Brockman came to the BAC and said, well, we need X amount of money to repair the middle school roof. He lists literally, if you look at the packets from the last couple of years, he lists different needs and wants. And I asked Adam, unfortunately, I said, Adam, because we cut his money in half, what are you going to do, only tar half the roof? Is that we get into the macro version of what we're trying to do is we start with what we're kind of working for. But to Mr. Brockman's point, which is great, is having this kind of input and direction. At the same time, we have to coalesce it in a very small window of time. But the current budget is kind of like the template. We then make adds and adjustments and things like that. But a lot of this, unfortunately, is due to the fact that the state, and Mr. Becerra probably knows where I'm going to go next, is the 8279, which was the money we get from the state. Mr. Brockman will have the first advocate of it, meaning the first pass of it, which gets changed every couple of months by them for some reason. That usually comes out at the end of January. But we don't ever actually have a final number from them usually till I remember it being September, October,
Well, yeah, it changes all
Right,
year
so
round.
we try to work from this, and we try to move us along. At the same time, it's not completely redoing everything from ground zero, so thank God, because we only have 90 days. But the reality is, our point and to some other things is to make sure that we're moving things along. So don't get me wrong, we sometimes jump back. Like Paul, I'll give you an example, is that the reason I love the demystifying the budget is sometimes we bring people back to the beginning, like if a month from now, and we did this with Steep Falls, to Kate McDonald's point, is we had these whole conversations about Steep Falls, brought people in, had a conversation, but then realized there was no financial way we could do it. So sometimes we're going to move forward, then we might come back and say, look, we can't do that. We just don't, I remember several times people have brought up the fact of lowering class sizes. Mr. Brockman twice has presented to the BAC numbers as far as what the cost was to decrease class enrollment. It was like 800,000 was one model he did for us years ago, and $1.2 million. And we just said, forget it. There's no way we can eat that kind of money. So we will move forward and come back. It's a process of ebb and flow. But the superintendent will present us a draft budget, and we will look at some of the options and discussions, but we will sometimes maybe move back if we think we have missed the whole purpose, to Mr. Brockman's point. If the budget that comes to us looks just outrageously, there's no way we can approve it. And I will laugh tongue-in-cheek. Mr. Brockman always comes and scares the living bejesus out of half the BAC, because his numbers are just like literally, so what do I tell my daughter? Eat next week. Or like, by the way, I'm sorry, no French fries for you for the next 2 months, because we can't afford it. The laughable thing is, no, it always starts coming back down to reality, but there is a line that we have to come to, and we will, and we work through that process.
Could I just add, I don't want to belabor this, but yes, I think we look at the strategic plan and their priorities will change from year to year. So that might be a place we would look at digging deeper into how we spend our money. But there are things that are kind of standard from year to year, the electric bill, the gas prices, right? The things that are just the regular expenses. There's not a lot of diving into those things. Salaries, there are responsibilities that we have negotiated with folks. So there's a lot of those things, but it is based on the strategic plan. And you can watch a very boring presentation that I gave at the last school board meeting. I think it was the last meeting, that I will never do that boring of a presentation again, but where I kind of went over the existing strategic plan.
I didn't think it was boring.
Oh, it was boring, but thank you, I appreciate that.
Sorry, there's a reason I'm chair, okay? Please. So yeah, Paul, if that resolves that question. To Erica's point, from a time stamp, the reason, like Nancy Lou may look at me, I'm constantly checking my phone. You have 27 minutes and 14 seconds. So page number 31 is over the hierarchical data. Page 31 is where we start what the current budget is and all that stuff. Isn't it freaky that I actually know that?
Yeah.
Oh, and I love by the way, cartoon on page 24 is a hoot. I get that joke. I got that joke. I got the chair. Yeah. I like the cartoon.
So on page 31, we're looking at our current year's budget. And this was the budget that was approved at the BAC, at the finance facilities, superintendent level, the district budget meeting, and the budget validation referendum meeting. So this was what was approved by taxpayers, the legislative body of the district. And one thing I'd like to point out is that if you look at where the money goes, down at the bottom left-hand on page 31, and you look at system administration, which is central office, the superintendent, the assistant, the business manager, the percentage of the total budget is 2.8%. It's not 7%. And one of the things that I really have a problem with is when this false information gets out and becomes what everybody believes. I try to give the best information that I can. These are real numbers. This is what it is. We're not going to overspend system administration budget. And therefore, what we actually spend at the end of the year will be less than 2.8% of the total budget for system administration. School administration are building principals, secretaries in buildings, and all the expenses that they have to run those buildings. It's separate from system administration. And it seems like everybody goes after system administration. But the thing is, it's required by state law to have a superintendent. We can't run the school system without that. It's required. And a system as large as ours, we're lucky that we only have one assistant superintendent, because many systems would have more than that. They would have more system administration than we do. The average in the state, which I'll provide that for you next time, is well above 2.8%. We're way lower than what most systems in the state have. So you can see that our total budget is broken down by the 11 articles that I talked about earlier. And you can see how much money, how much is earmarked toward each of those categories in the 11 articles. Obviously, regular instruction is the highest at 38.9%. Facilities would be next. Special ed is next at 17.2. Facilities, 14.4. We have a big campus that has a lot of needs. Student staff support, 9.9. Most of these percentages, and I'll compare them to state averages for you at the next meeting, are lower than state averages. We do a good job with the money that we have. The amount of money for general fund tax assessments is lower, and we'll hit that slide a little later if we have time. We also look at the budget early on, not necessarily by the 11 articles. The 11 articles are the way we have to vote. But we look at it because we want another slice of the pie, a little bit different, so that you can see things that you might be able to understand a little bit better than what's included in each of these articles.
Bill, just have one question from Addie.
Where is the staff salary located? In which
All over
section?
the place. It's in different places. Teachers is in regular instruction.
Okay.
Special ed salaries for teachers is in special ed.
Okay.
Other instruction has things like athletic salaries in that article. Where we place the salaries is based on what the state requires. They determine where things are budgeted in what articles. And so because the fact that when you look at the 11 articles and you see that salaries are in multiple articles, you can't really get your head around, how much are we spending for salaries in the district? And that's why on the right-hand side of the page, you can see the budget that's broken down into object categories so that you can look at how much money is actually spent on salaries for everybody. For instance, in Article 8, we have bus driver salaries. That's a big expenditure. Article 9 is the facility maintenance budget, which has custodial and maintenance salaries in. So I combine all of those categories into one to show you how much money is actually in salaries and in benefits. And when you look at those two categories, salaries represents about 58.7% of the total budget, and benefits 17.7%. So when you add those two categories together, we have 70% of our budget or more going for salaries and benefits.
76.1329.
Oh, that's good. I can't do that in my head.
Yeah, oh, by the way, Addie, when he gives you the full budget, it's about 3,700 lines. Mr. Brockman has a bet with me. He'll ask me, like, what's in this line? I haven't lost that bet in 10 years. So each one of the salary things is actually broken out. But yes, by the way, I always have fun with the fact that salaries and benefits represents the lion's share of our budget, which leaves roughly at $43,042,219, I think, in combined of the 56 million. Leaves us only about 13 million for the rest of it.
For everything else.
Everything else. So salaries and benefits is big chunk. The rest is all the little bit we have. And Lori, you had your hand up.
I was just going to share too. I always think it's fascinating. People might not know what PP allocation is. Per pupil allocation is the actual money that principals get to spend in their buildings and that different departments get to spend. So only 5% of the overall budget goes to, textbooks, supplies, paper, but not facility-related things, but like classroom supplies, textbooks, paper, any other stuff, staff professional development, staff travel, like all those things, like if people want to go to a conference. So I always think that's fascinating too. Like not only does the majority of the budget go to salaries, like doing something like, oh, we're going to cut back on paper usage doesn't really impact your budget. Yeah. Like scraping a little bit here and there and like making things difficult for teachers and giving them, scraps doesn't actually save you much money in your overall budget because most of your money is in salaries.
And just for clarification purposes, when Adam said it doesn't include his, it does. He's part of the per pupil allocation. We do per pupil allocations for all the departments. Transportation has an allocation they have to live within. What we hope to do with that is to provide some site-based decision-making for each program and for each building so that they can use their money to do what they need to do within their buildings. Now that money is not used at all for salaries or benefits. Those are separate. But everything that they buy, anything that field trips, for instance, that's part of that. For Adam, it's things that he has to buy to, put fertilizer on the fields. Or what I try to do to help some of these areas is that we have another category called recurring costs. And those are the things that are more fixed in nature, like what Clay was talking about, is that they, you can't expect a building to know how much they're going to spend for fuel oil. So those kind of things that are fixed at a global level, we budget centrally. And those things are separate. So that isn't part of the money that Adam has, for instance, to spend for his day-to-day operations of his buildings, to buy the things that come up when they go to plumbers and buy a screwdriver. Those things come out.
Yeah, I'm not going to put Adam on the spot. Oh, by the way, the case is that before we go to charity, Lori's per pupil allocations, page 39, there's a chart that actually lists where we are. We are way below state average. Charity, you had your hand up? You're all set? Any other comments? All right. You have 15 minutes, Mr. Brockman.
So you can see that, this is the budget that we're living with this year. And it was a difficult year, and you know that there was a big increase. And part of the problem was what we've gone through the past 2.5 years as far as pandemic expenses and needs. So it was hard to be very precise, not knowing what was going to happen and who was going to pay for it. So we had money from the feds. The problem with that money, it was we could not use it for anything that was a current cost within our budget. We couldn't supplant. We couldn't take that money and say, we're gonna take all of our custodians and pay for them out of the federal. We could only take that kind of money that they gave us and use it for things that were directly related to pandemic costs. So what happens is that when you're not bringing your kids into school and you have to hire more people to do remote or whatever it might be, we could charge that to the pandemic and we would save money because we're not running the schools at the same level that we would have had to run them if all 3,400 kids were in the classroom. So it wasn't an anomaly year. It was a year that was difficult, first of all, to budget for, not knowing what was coming, because we were told by the president that the pandemic would be over by next Thursday, and it didn't happen that way. So what happened at the end of that process is that the money is not sustainable because it doesn't, we got a lot of money and we had to use it for specific things. Like, for instance, we put air handlers in all the buildings that would remove the COVID-19. That in itself cost $1.7 million. And we had to hire additional staff. And the problem with additional staff, when you hire them with federal funds, it's not sustainable. What happens, you have to include them in the district operating budget as soon as the funds stop coming, and the funds have stopped coming. So we had, going into this current year budget right here, is we had a number of positions that were still required because pandemic was not over and the kids had lost so much ground that they still needed supports. And so those positions had to become part of the general fund budget. And that's one of the reasons that we were as high as we were. And you have to pay for that. I mean, you can't lay off all those people that you still need. And once they're here for a while, you're going to keep them because you're providing services with those people.
Real
So
quick question from Ben, and then hopefully move
Yeah,
forward.
we only have a few minutes, so we'll talk about it at the next meeting. I would be interested in seeing a report of the Fed money positions that were taken on. Of course, with a catch-22 of Fed money is, in the long run, we should be assessing, is it sustainable financially once the Fed money runs out? Because eventually the money runs out. The
Exactly.
quantitative easing is the biggest scam in this country. And I would love to see a report regarding the positions and the things that were allocated on the basis of the Fed money was poured into this district.
I can provide that. That was part of the budget process last year. It was listed out by position so that the Budget Advisory Committee saw exactly what was going into the general fund budget. It was not anything that was hidden or covered up. It was right out in the open. But I'll give you that page out of last year's budget so that you can see what it went in.
Thank you.
We got about 8 minutes left. The case is that, by the way, we will give you a chance to review all this information. The next meeting on January the 19th will, I believe, in a sense, the subject, Mr. Brockman, will be delving back into this, all this stuff, kind of going through the charts and graphs.
We'll start from there and go in more detail, and I'll fill in some of the blanks. And we'll also look at the process that we use is, Todd really defined it pretty well. We look at a baseline budget, same programs and services as the previous year, not adding anything new, not adding any positions, not even looking at capital, not building in capital improvements into the operating budget, but keeping them into a capital improvement program. And we'll look at those things not as part of the baseline, but we'll look at what it's costing us next year for the same programs and services that we're doing this year. And some of those things that have significant impact for next year's budget is the fact that we have inflation. First time in a long time that it's significant. Electricity, fuel oil, diesel, all of that stuff has increased, and we're doing the best we can to try to find sources and ways to do things cheaper. And one of the things that we have done over the past few years, for instance, in maintenance, is that we've changed many of our systems to propane. We were able to sign a propane contract that will go out for 3 years more, and the price is $1.91 a gallon. See if you can get that at home.
So the case is that, by the way, on page 42, what the additional important budget information, concepts, or issues with the BAC like to thing. If it hasn't been addressed, and by the way, don't understand, this is not a time limit. As I said, Eric and I's information, including Mrs. Plummer's, will be out. Like, you got the email, always feel free to send it back to Tina, who's on vacation this week, I think, or off.
Yeah, she is.
And the case is that, the fact is that if you have any concerns that weren't addressed already, we don't have to repeat everything that was covered in the group discussion last time, or that was just discussed tonight. If there was any points that were missed, feel free, if you don't, in the next couple of minutes to say something. But if you miss it, don't get me wrong, just feel free to send it in and we will add it as
Send it
part of
in
the
and we'll add it.
conversation.
You know,
Nothing's off the table, by the way. Don't get me wrong. You understand that part of the whole process that we're dealing with tonight is to not only discuss the things that you come up with, but also at the same time, might be issues or concerns, budget related. Okay? So the case is that if there are anything hot or, major. Now, of course, you remember last time at this juncture in the meeting, I was bugging Mr. Gleason about whether we were going to get a snow day or not. So, the point is that, look, I've got an extra 2 minutes to kill now, okay? Any concerns or questions, anything that issues or things?
Add one thing.
Yeah, Eric.
One of the things that really helped me last year was understanding how a lot of these line items have been broken down, and I've seen a lot of the same sort of angst in our community when folks go on and look at this 300-page document and they see all these lines and there's large dollar values assigned to it. And what really helped me last year was understanding how some of these salary lines are broken down. As someone who deals with this too, there's a lot more to a salary line than just the check that they get home. So understanding how some of these things are broken down, so that as we in the community are talking to others, we can say, yeah, it may say that so and so is making $147,000, but they're not. And this is why this budget is a set, but also the overall apples to apples. So, what are we spending here versus what are other schools spending? And I can't remember on what page, but it does cover, the overall page 39, the overall cost per student that we're paying versus other schools in our area, and that gets into how can we make sure that we're competitive with salaries, so that we're not losing teachers where they can get paid a lot more. But also giving us that overall baseline of are these dollar values that we're assigning to these budget lines comparable? Because if everyone's spending X dollars on their overall textbook budget, then it's okay, yeah, that makes sense that the number of students that we have and the budget that we've assigned to it does make sense. Now I know there's a large lift there in doing that, but as we're going through, from what I'm feeling from the group here is if we can compare what expenditures are and break down some of these lines to kind of demystify them, that would help.
There isn't any way that I can break it down to a level that is below what the state provides information for. I can look at all the articles and to make sure that we're in line or less than or more than. And why.
Yeah.
For instance, when we look at transportation, we're going to see that we're higher.
We're spending a lot more gas.
We have a bigger transportation department than anybody else. So I can give you that information, but there's no way that I can.
No, and I'm not asking you to say what someone in Kennebunk is
mine that
paying
information
with
out of
what. Yeah.
30 school systems.
Yeah.
Because they don't have time to give it to me.
Yeah.
And the state collects it at a higher level. I can't tell you textbooks, for instance. Textbooks is an object code. I don't know, because the state doesn't break it down to that level. But I can tell you how much is spent in an article.
Yeah.
For instance, regular instruction. Most of the textbook accounts is one of 200 line items within that article. So I can't pull out that number and compare it to somebody, but I can compare the total amount that we're spending for salaries and benefits and everything else in regular instruction. That's good information.
Yeah.
And I will provide that for you.
That'd be great.
And the Finance Committee years ago, and on several times, we looked at, and I'm sure the Finance Committee's on occasion, we looked at our rates for, let's say, we'll just say gas or propane. The rates that MSAD6 gets in comparison to most of the other districts, except for maybe Portland or Bangor or some other districts, are pretty aggressive. You know, our rates are historically way lower than like some of the other districts are paying, which is a shock, but reality is we do a good job. Now, the case is that, Lori, yep,
I just wanted a point of clarification because we flipped between the two pages and they're not the same thing. So
Yeah.
we have two things called per pupil, and I want to make sure people aren't confused.
Yeah.
So the per pupil allocation on the chart that we were talking about a while ago is like the money each department and school gets based on the number of kids in the building or people in the building, right? That's not the number on page 39. The page 39 number is how much our entire budget costs broken down per student.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure you knew that that 13,000 is the whole thing, not that little sliver. They just both, we use the word per pupil for both things, but they're not the
The
same thing.
amount for per pupil allocations in the current year budget is only 2,900,000.
900,000. Yeah, 209,900. Yeah.
You know, it's not a big amount of money.
No.
When you figure, that's all the money that they have that they can spend on things, you know, that aren't,
If there's no, yeah, of course, is that, by the way, the next meeting's the 19th. If there's any weather, sorry, as we discussed last time, if there's any weather-related issues, our ardent hope and prayer is that, you know, you get home safe and you get here safe. If there's ever a question about the fact of the roads or your family or things like that, always put the needs of your family, like I tell parents all the time. Just understand, our staff and everyone else, if there's no other pressing concerns, the case is that the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn, but we don't, just so we can keep moving along.
Second?
All right. So Eric and Nancy Lou Stiles have a motion. All those in favor of adjourning? Yay. By the way, you know, I've never had that motion struck down. All right. Thank you very much. As I said, appreciate you all coming out.